Welcome to the Nord Show, a podcast where we sit and discuss with creators and get their thoughts on all things movies, games, and content creation. I'm your host, Joe Aragon. You may know me from TikTok as Cinema Joe, and I'm joined today by Drift0r. We'll be chatting about their experience creating content, variety gaming, horror movies, and at the end, answering some community questions at the end. Drift, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good. I've had a good day, good couple of days, and I am
Very
glad
good,
to
very
be
good.
here and glad to take any opportunity that I can to talk about scary movies.
I am also very excited about this. This is the first episode I'm doing where I get to exclusively talk about horror movies, a genre I'm also passionate about. So when you responded horror movies, I was very excited. Um,
Looked really
Before
good
we
because
dive
you
in,
said Shudder. I mentioned Shudder, and you were like, "Oh, I love Shudder," and I'm like, "Yes, it's gonna be so
I
good."
know it's a gateway into so much great horror movies that I'm sure we'll get to talk about very soon. But before we dive into the rest of the episode, make sure to follow NordVPN on Spotify and Apple, and of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel to never miss an episode. Use that link in the description of the episode to get a great deal on NordVPN. All right, let's get into this. Before we jump into horror, let's know more about you. Content creator for a long time, a streamer, a horror movie connoisseur yourself. Easy questions to start things off. When did this all start? Why did you start creating online, and what really ignited all of this?
I have pretty much always liked film and movies ever since I was a little bitty kid. I was doing stuff with the home video camera. In the early 2000s, I got a digital camera that could do photos and videos, and I was doing creative
Mm,
projects. And stuff like YouTube didn't really exist at the time. You had to do GeoCities or host a server and upload your WMV files. And then this scrappy little website called YouTube rolled out. And I think it was 2005 or six. And I just upgraded my digital camera. So I made some short stop motion films and some little things to put on there. And it was really fun. Didn't think about it a whole lot until I was in college. And randomly, I got an Xbox Live voice message of people asking for body actors for a machinima film. I had no idea what this
interesting.
is. I had to find out. So I replied to the spam. I joined and I realized people were making little short films like Red versus Blue in
Oh yeah, I
Halo
remember
and
that.
in-game engines. And I realized it was a super cheap way to do it because you don't really need actors, you don't need a big special effects budget, probably a little voice here and there, some editing. I bought a little bit of equipment and just started creating. I got very lucky, got a couple of hits, a couple of pushes, a contract, and all of a sudden it's making sort of how would I say, like waiter or waitress kind of money, like part-time
Mm.
job, great for college. And I just kept scaling and scaling and scaling. And I've thoroughly enjoyed the entire process. I just like making content. I like making things that are fun, and it's an excuse to do that. And God bless me, it pays. So
You've unlocked so many memories with this story because I remember those early days of YouTube and watching Halo music videos of like just the characters moving their heads and bobbing their heads
yes.
to like an All American Reject song or something of that nature. Were you making content like that, or was it specifically a certain game?
Mostly Halo because that had the best engine to film in. We did a little bit in
Mhm.
COD and a little bit in Source, but that was like not as robust as it is now. And most of what my crew did, we either did comedy or drama because
Mm,
comedy was the one that sold. That's what people liked. We did a lot of
yep.
lowbrow humor. And then there was this sort of artistic side of it where people would make all these stories about sad Spartans and dramatic events and the lore of Halo. And we really prided ourselves on doing a good job there. Those just never made money. I'm glad I did that.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
skills that I learned from making proper dramatic productions helped me a lot doing comedy and other sort of commentary things later in life.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. Were you ever, I mean, you were making content around gaming. Were you gaming yourself?
Oh
Anything
yeah,
competitively that you
sure.
were really into? Not
Not
competitively,
competitively.
but maybe casually that you were playing every day?
Every day, a lot of shooter games, Halo,
Mhm.
Call of Duty. I played around with Unreal at the time. I think Mirror's Edge. I put a lot of time into
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of FPS games.
Okay. Okay. Well, you've done a really great job building this community. What's one of your favorite things about the community that you've built?
The community that I've built is mostly comprised of good people that do help me and help other
Mm,
people when it's the right time. So, for example, a number of years ago, my mother suffered a mental health crisis and got one of those bus discharges out to like downtown Dallas. And I'm on the other side of the country, and she's just wandering around for days. I couldn't do anything about it. So I got on Twitter, I got on YouTube, I got the social media going. I uploaded photos, directions, blah, blah, blah. And within about an hour or two, my fans had managed to find my mom wandering around out of her
Wow.
mind in downtown Dallas. And one of them was kind enough to pick her up, give her food, water, pizza, Gatorades, dehydrated, and booked her a hotel for like a week. And that kindness helped stabilize her and help me to take care of the situation. And that's one of the good examples. But I've tried really hard to build a good community and be responsible with the following that I have. And that definitely doesn't come back every day, but every now and then, when it really counts, it comes back in a huge way. And that's what I'm most proud of my community for.
Wow, that is an incredible story and an incredible example of the community that you've built. Haven't heard something like that, and I'm really happy to hear that community's pulled through for you. Kind of switching gears then, pivoting. You mentioned earlier your content creation has really evolved around, gaming and film. This is a podcast about film ultimately, film and gaming. What kind of genres and movies do you really gravitate towards? We already know from the beginning we're talking about horror, but any other genres you're really into? And if not, why horror over everything else?
Yes, there's actually a genre above horror, but it's like one of these specialty ones, probably something your guests haven't seen. I love transgressive films. And for your
Oh,
audience, that's
interesting.
not trans, the sexual orientation, but transgressing as in offensive, something out there, something that stretches your brain and makes you think. Or, I've been watching movies and scary movies and I live on the internet. I'm a hard man to offend. If a movie
Mm,
makes me upset about something, that movie has done a very good job. I like
interesting.
movies that just really push the boundary of what is normal.
Yeah. Okay. That is definitely one category we have not really dived and touched on because it can be pretty intense. And as somebody who is also into film, yeah, that is one type of genre where even I've dabbled here and there, and I'll watch something like, ooh, I take a couple steps back and I'll turn on a Pixar movie because I need to wash my brain.
I feel you on that. I have to do the same thing. Like I like transgressive stuff and I look for it, but then sometimes it's too far and I just have to say, whoa, hold up. You got to put the brakes on that. That's a little bit too advanced for me. You know,
Okay. Okay.
some things
That's
aren't just
fair.
good for
That's
your
fair.
brain to watch.
Yeah, yeah, I totally understand. Well, you've chosen a horror movie today, and not only
Mhm.
did you choose a horror movie today, but I am ecstatic 'cause you chose 2021's *Malignant*. Uh, I was speechless when you said that. By the way,
Okay,
I didn't
that's
think in a
good.
million years that all the guests we're going to reach out to say, "Yeah, let's talk about *Malignant*." Why *Malignant*? I just have to know why.
Okay. So I told you that I could talk about obscure horror movies for days. I'm looking at my
Mhm,
list here. I literally have trauma films, Rollerball, In the Mouth of Madness, Puppet Master, that kind of nonsense.
mhm.
But I thought, okay, so for your audience, like 0.1% of people are going to know what those things are. So I wanted to
Fair,
think of a
fair.
really fun horror movie that was also mainstream enough for the majority of the audience to recognize. And I really thought, and I thought the one that was most up my alley and that was the most fun was Malignant. It was also
Mhm.
very popular for a bit. So if we talk about Malignant, everybody's going to know about it. And to be honest, I think *Malignant* is a very clever homage to all of those other worse, like more schlocky
Mm.
movies that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I would agree with you as well. Now, you mentioned that a lot of people will know it at least. *Malignant* was, let's say, polarizing at best. There was a diehard group of people who were in love with it. I would include myself in that. But there was a large amount of people who were like, "What are we watching? What is going on?" Help me explain to people who are listening. Why do you think there was such a big divide between people?
Can I do spoilers?
We can. This movie has been
Okay,
out long enough. Let's talk
so
spoilers. If you haven't seen
spoilers.
*Malignant* and you're listening, take a quick pause, watch it, come back in 2 hours, and resume.
So *Malignant's made by James Wan, who you probably know from The Insidious, Conjuring, perhaps Aquaman, his most successful film.
Mm,
And he got kind of a blank check to do whatever he wanted. And he made this movie called *Malignant*, and it was advertised a lot like The Conjuring, a lot like Annabelle, spooky ghost, maybe the single mom's going crazy in the big New England house kind of thing. And a lot of people were talking about it, and I don't watch a lot of those sort of spooky ghosts in a big house movies. So I was like, why are people really into this? And I found that there was a twist. Tried not to spoil it. So I watched this movie, and for the first hour, honest to God, I hated it. I have a real love hate with this
Interesting.
because the first hour was like a parody of a James Wan movie.
Yeah,
Everything
that's fair.
was everything that he does, the spooky ghosts, the psychological horror, the weird proportions of the house, honestly, and some of the other things are just like somebody tried to make a knockoff. And then there's a big twist in the last 30 minutes, which the movie actually put real clues and built up to. It just didn't quite look right into. This is the big spoiler. There is no ghost and there is no alternate personality. Instead, the person has a absorbed twin. I forget the right word, but where you absorb your twin, but the brain was absorbed. So there's two brains in one head. And the twin also has evil psychic powers and is super strong and can do contortion. And it literally turns into John Wick, Rambo, hyper violent, murdering, and it goes really, really schlocky and cheesy with puppet monsters and blood. It reminds me a lot of a film called Basket Case by Frank Hellenblatter, if you've seen that one. Very schlocky, like Frankenhooker, like very out there. And honestly, it was so close to the plot of that movie, I swear to God, it had to have inspired the filming. And the last 30 minutes of Malignant are somewhere between insane and brilliant. And at the very least, they're tremendously entertaining.
Yes. Wow. Well said. You hit every point perfectly, to be honest. I have to know, did you expect the twist? I feel like I talked to a lot of people who said, oh, I kind of saw that coming. And I remember watching it in theaters and saying, I had no idea that was going to be the twist. I had no idea I was going to see this like person morphed into someone's body and like head, basically. Did you expect that? Were you surprised by it?
I expected a twist because I wasn't going to watch it before people told me there was a twist. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of looking for it, but no, I didn't. I really didn't expect that. For the people at home, we really want to emphasize this goes from ghost to literal like latex puppets tearing people up like really fast.
Yes, you did a really good job pointing out there's at that last 30-minute mark of the movie, it does go full bananas and just John Wick police station
but backwards brawl. John Wick, because the thing pops eyes out of the back of her head. So the actress has to do all these stunts backwards, and there's this stunt man, woman, something like shooting guns backwards and running up a wall like in the Matrix, but backwards and doing all this absolutely bonkers shit, killing probably like 40 cops.
Yes, it's exactly what happens. And I think if you people are listening, I get it. I kind of understand why people weren't a big fan of it because it's so off the wall ridiculous. But I think that's why I was in love with it. And I think that if you went in thinking it was a traditional, scary movie like The Conjuring, then you may have been a little caught off guard or not in love with it. Speaking of which, how do you feel about James Wan's other horror movies? Do you like The Conjuring? Do you like Insidious? Or Dead Silence is another one of his. It's kind of a little less known.
So I liked them initially, but the thing is he's kind of made the same movie over and over again a lot, which is what Malignant looked like. It's like, oh, this is the Conjuring with a different name, but it wasn't. I do like, of all of his movies, Insidious probably the best. The first one, despite being PG-13 and despite being a little bit of the spooky ghost in the house, I have a soft spot for it. I love the idea of sort of the dream demon and going to the afterlife, and I love the twist at the end, which normally things don't scare me in movies, but that one made me go,
Interesting. Yes, when you see the guy's face for the first time, I feel like that was a big moment.
Well, the demon reveal where it slides out behind that terrified me. That I've seen stuff like but that's a good feeling though. It made me feel something.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like it as well. That reveal of the demon Insidious is definitely a memorable moment that I love. We have to talk about Saw. I mean, James Wan is the creator of Saw, him and Lee Wanell. How do you feel about Saw and the Saw franchise?
I like the film Saw.
Okay.
The Saw franchise is sort of like Saw is at the top of the roller coaster and the franchise for the most part kind of goes down. Saw was an interesting independent film. It was well acted. It had a good message. It had just the right amount of brutality. You didn't have a lot of characters, right? Mm-hmm. So when people got hurt and they died, it was a character that you knew, that you felt for, that you cared about. Later Saw movies was like, Saw and Hostel are popular. Let's throw some lady into a pit of needles and put big gauges in people's mouth and it just turned into sort of torture porn, which I love a gory movie, but it has to have some point or purpose. The torture porn stuff kind of gets boring and it makes me feel like I'm a bad person when I'm watching it.
Okay, that's a really fair point. And you made a lot of good points about it opening that door to a lot of movies to just capitalize on a cheap budget and just the torture porn of it all. I like Saw 1 a lot. Saw 2, as you said, it is a roller coaster. It does go down. I always remember the needle pit of Saw 2. That one's burned into my brain, so I'm glad you brought it up.
That was a gnarly moment.
It's a very gnarly moment. I'm curious to know how you feel. I mean, you're so well versed into horror movies, and obviously extending back to the 80s, you brought up Basket Case. And how do you feel about the current state of mainstream horror now? I mean, we're talking about Malignant, which is pretty mainstream, in The Conjuring. But what of things like Hereditary and Midsummer that are more artsy, but still kind of mainstream?
I love those movies. That, The Witch. There was a pretty good one on Netflix called The Ritual, which I was surprised by how good it was. So I have a love-hate with modern horror. I think that there's some really good stuff coming out of like Blumhouse. Like The Invisible Man, for example, a horror movie that's more about gaslighting and emotional abuse. And I grew up in a broken household like that. So for me, the terrifying parts of this movie wasn't like that the man was invisible, but the efforts that he would go through to gaslight the main protagonist. So that was really great. I think Shudder has actually been really good for horror movies because it's giving a landing place for the films that nobody else will touch. Because horror movies are like R to X rated for the most part. And there's a bunch of stuff that comes out that can't get a distributor, that nobody wants to print Blu-rays for, that's foreign or something. And Shudder's like, gimme. And they'll put up all the independent crazy stuff. I love that. I like that with streaming, the death of the R rating is pretty much upon us. So people aren't playing by studio rules as much. However, there's also some bad things happening in horror. I mentioned the sort of generic spooky ghost movie. Unfortunately, that's the scary movie that really makes money these days. So like 80% of them are generic spooky ghosts. I find that they greatly over rely on CGI in movies instead of good filmmaking or storytelling. And also, I hate CGI gore for some reason. The real like liquidy, goopy stuff from the 80s just seems more real to me. A good example that might be a good segue, I feel that a lot of more modern horror movies that come out of studios get kind of neutered and they lack teeth. For example, Jennifer's Body. That movie got dragged when it came out. I saw it a year or two ago for the first time. And it felt like it was a film that was like this close to being absolutely brilliant. But I could literally see where people edited and gutted certain components of it. And I was like, I wonder what that would have been without interference. So more that's practical. Kind of what I'm thinking about horror these days.
That's fair. Those are a lot of great points you're making. And like you said, what's selling now, and I will just echo what you said, is the big ghost stories, things like that. If it's not that, it feels like it's a soulless remake of something that was very popular 10, 30 years ago. And specifically, I don't know if you saw the newest Texas Chainsaw Massacre on Netflix.
I did not.
That was a remake that was, we'll just say, not good. We got Firestarter last month, which was a remake.
Was that good? 80s. I was excited about that. I love the original.
I would say that is also not good.
Oh, no.
Sadly.
That hurts.
It hurts me too. I promise you. I don't like not liking movies. I don't like to say movies not good. I like movies and I like to praise them when I can. It doesn't feel good to say a movie's bad. Did you see the most recent Scream 5? I
did not. So I haven't been going out to theaters a whole lot. I'm a little bit more immunocompromised than I used to be. So I play a little safer. I watch most stuff at home.
Completely fine. I think it is now available at home too. So when you get a chance to watch it, I liked Scream 5. Now, legacy sequels are a bit of a debate in the movie community because do we need them? Are they just cash grabs? Scream has always been a very meta horror movie, so they really play that up in the newest one. So you might enjoy it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. You brought up Shudder earlier. For people who aren't listening, what is Shudder?
It is advertised as the streaming service exclusively for horror movies. If you want to watch scary movies, all of that stuff is on Shudder. I signed up thinking that, and I was very disappointed initially. I think Shudder is more like the independent film channel, old horror movies, and some stuff in the middle, maybe not even horror, but just stuff that's so offensive nobody else will touch, which turned out to be way more fun than just scary movies. Getting into that really juicy section in the middle, so much crazy stuff. Like, did you see Dogs Don't Wear Pants?
I did not see Dogs Don't Wear Pants. No.
Are you familiar?
It's ringing a bell because I am a subscriber of Shudder. It's cheap enough. This is, by the way, anybody listening, this is not sponsored by Shudder. We just happen to really like Shudder. But it rings a bell. I have not watched it.
Brief plot summary. It's about I think it's a Finnish film, so it's set in Finland. A surgeon who falls in love with a dominatrix, and he's a very generic vanilla guy, but he's got bad depression. So he keeps going harder and harder with this dominatrix, trying to trick her into killing him. And it's a movie that flies way off the rails. It goes out there in the BDSM community. It rides a fine line between being drama and horror, and then sort of like a wholesome relationship thing, if you consider BDSM relationships wholesome, like consent and where the boundaries are, because he's violating her consent by trying to die instead of consenting just to, getting roughed up and stuff.
Okay,
But
interesting.
definitely not something that could even be rated in America, which is why it's on Shudder and why I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Now, are you aware there was a study done maybe a year ago now, maybe 2 years, by a particular group? Sorry, I don't remember their name, but they gauged a bunch of audiences and said, "Hey, we're going to make you watch all these scary movies and track your BPM, and then we'll decide based on science what the scariest movie of all time is." And recently, a Shudder exclusive has taken the mantle at first place. Do you have any idea what that could be? There's a ton of movies, but do you think you know what it is?
Sadness.
It is not the Sadness.
Oh.
It's not that recent. Sadness is pretty recent to Shudder, as in a month ago, I think.
That's one I could not finish. I watched about 30 minutes, and I talk about transgressive. That's way too transgressive, getting way too rapey. I had to dip.
Yeah, as someone who watched it last maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, not an easy watch, not something I'd even recommend to people. Actually, so the movie that was voted the scariest movie, I say of all time in quotes, because obviously it's a very small pool of people, a small pool of movies. But according to science, Host, a Shudder exclusive called Host, was considered the scariest movie of all time. It was a found footage film, kind of, if you ever saw Unfriended, where you kind of just watch a laptop the entire time.
Okay, I saw
very
this.
similar to that.
It didn't look that interesting.
It's actually pretty good. I enjoyed it. I mean, look, we're not talking anything special in terms of deep substance, but essentially for people who are listening, you want to watch it. It is a taken during COVID, and these group of friends want to hold a seance via Zoom, which sounds like a terrible idea. Guess what? It is. So this was technically, per science, what this group found to be the scariest movie out there. And this is a Shudder exclusive. That's why I brought it up. The second place one that was first for a long time was the Scott Derrickson movie Sinister, which was a popular one.
I was thinking there was another one. I was thinking about the Invitation starring Logan Marshall Green, which
love The Invitation.
Gave me horrible anxiety.
Yes. Yeah.
Ooh. Even though it's not like traditionally scary.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's a hard one for me personally to recommend to people because it is very slow, I guess you could say. It's a slow burn. But I really liked it. I think the payoff is worth it. So
I think it's good if you grew up in a bad situation. So I grew up in a lot of rough spots, right? So even as an adult, I'm a little paranoid. I'm looking for little body language clues and stuff. So I was watching The Invitation, and within 5 minutes, I was just seeing like red flags everywhere, just sweating. And my wife is like, "What's wrong? Everything's normal here. This is a boring movie."
Yeah. A lot of people might find it boring. I think it's worth the slow burn. Karen Kusama, who directed it, also did Jennifer's Body. So ironically enough, we talked about that earlier. So a lot of great horror, and I think Shudder is great because of you can find great exclusives that we've talked about, and you can find some classic stuff on there as well. And then there is that middle ground where it's like, gotta be careful what you're watching, and then you may find something you like. So, okay. Any other Shudder exclusives that come to mind that you really liked? I remember there was one called Blood Quantum I really liked. It was a zombie movie taking place on like a Native American reservation. That was really interesting.
Very highly rated. I didn't watch it. I did watch their animated one that came out recently, Spine of Night.
Okay.
I despise that animation style, but I stuck with the movie, and the payout for the last 45 minutes was super good. I enjoyed that one. I enjoyed Blood Machines, which is the 3-part miniseries by Carpenter Brute and Seth Ickerman, if you're familiar. Musicians, they specialize in making like retro 80s horror stuff, but they made this space opera that was great. And what is another Shudder? VHS 94.
94.
Crap. Especially that middle segment was really kind of the whole movie for me. It's a better Doom movie than all of the Doom movies combined, and it's like 15 minutes long, and it just stomps dicks from start to end, and it is glorious.
Yeah, I love VHS a lot. 94. The first VHS I like. I don't love it, but I like it. I like it enough for certain segments of it. So,
Yeah, certain
but
segments, they're all like that. Every one of those movies has one or two real bangers and some junk.
yeah. Yes, exactly. But 94 is pretty solid. I like 94 a lot. Awesome. Okay, let's take a quick ad break because we'll just keep snowballing into more and more horror movies. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll do some quick rankings. Are you missing out on your favorite shows because it's not available in your region? Trying to keep your private time private? Well, let me introduce you to NordVPN. If you're bored of US Netflix, and why not take a spin on the UK? Use NordVPN, and at a click of a button, you can do just that. With 5,000 plus server options, no show is out of your reach. We all love to binge, but privacy is a big deal. NordVPN keeps your information encrypted, so you never have to worry about your IP or location getting out. Make sure to use Drift0r's link in the description of the episode to get a great deal on NordVPN, and of course, support Drift0r's channel. All right, Drift, we've talked a ton of horror. Could you rank your 3 horror movies of all time? I mean,
That was a tall order.
I assumed it would be, but we have to make decisions here.
I thought of 3 that came up sort of in different subgenres. My number one
cool.
favorite horror movie of all time is probably Suspiria.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, we're going far back. Okay.
Dario Argento, the original. I love the new Amazon one. On an objective filmmaking sense, the new Amazon one has better acting, better plot, better use of the art, blah, blah, blah. But the original Suspiria is the best example I can think of something that is pure style over substance, but that style bar is filled up to maximum. And that movie, despite being old as dirt, creeps me out in a very profound way. And it's very artistic, and the music just keeps me just going. So that's a super good one. Next, I was actually going to say VHS. If I could make a hypercut of my favorite segments, though that would be really strong. And I like The Witch as well. Sort of the slow burn, the little bit more grounded version of horror. Really enjoyed The Witch.
So I want to back up and nerd out a little bit. You mentioned Argento's Suspiria. Have you checked out any of other Argento stuff?
A number of them.
Okay.
Do you want my opinion about the rest of it?
I'm curious why Suspiria over Deep Red, which is my favorite one, and maybe the most popular one behind Suspiria, if you've seen Deep Red.
I saw Deep Red, but unfortunately it was a really long time ago, so I don't remember it very well. I've watched the second one, Inferno, that comes after Suspiria. I watched Phenomena. I watched Demons 1 and 2, and a lot of the more marketable films that are easy to find.
Okay.
And I find that Dario Argento is mostly not good movies, but every now and then it's all cylinders firing and it's a banger. And I think it's because he was one of those Italian giallo filmmakers that made all these on a budget of nothing over like 2 weeks. And you can really tell when they're just cobbling stuff together versus when they have a team of artists on board. And I think that sort of inconsistency turns people off to the artist sometimes.
Oh, big time. And yeah, you hit the buzzword, and that was giallo, which is, for people who aren't listening, is an Italian word for this kind of subgenre that we're discussing right now. That is kind of hit or miss for some people. You either really love it or you may not like it at all. Nice connections that we're going to be making. James Wan has gone on record saying that Malignant was really heavily inspired by the giallo movement. Do you see that? Do you agree?
Yeah, you've got the villain mostly in the dark, and the giallo films, a lot of them, you'd see the hand and the glove, and the camera would be super close, so you'd see the knife going like right into the heart, whole frame. And there was some kind of shots like that, the same kind of gloved villain that happens in the back. And a lot of the giallo films would have a female protagonist that nobody believes for some particular reason. So it was the same kind of structure there. A female protagonist says all these things are happening, and all the professionals are like, psh, you crazy.
Yeah,
so I can see that. I can see some of the colors too when they do use red.
Yeah, I agree. I remember watching Malignant and thinking like, this has to have some inspiration. And I remember looking it up and finding some interviews. He's saying, yeah, giallo inspiration, 80s inspiration. So I think Basket Case was an 80s movie, so I would totally understand.
Yeah, Basket Case was I think it was early 80s.
Got it.
I think it was pretty early in the 80s.
All I know is Basket Case is I can see the monster in my head and I hate it because it is so just gross looking. It makes me uncomfortable. I do not like it. You mentioned VHS. We talked about that. We haven't talked about The Witch, which is a I'm going to talk about because I love The Witch as well. Huge fan of that movie and Robert Eggers as a director. Another polarizing one, though. That's one you look at Rotten Tomatoes, it's like 92% critics, 40% audience score. Where's the divide? What do you think is happening here?
Some people do not like art films. A lot of people do not like slow burn films. A lot of people also do not like films set in the 1600s where they use a lot of old speak.
Mhm.
And The Witch as a film, this is spoilers, is very old, is sort of a very slow burn thing about a Puritan family that left the community because the community wasn't good enough for them. They were going to go be pure, even more pure out on their own. And their crops started failing. Their animals were dying. The husband and wife was fighting. The kids were fighting because they're living in a terrible situation. And on top of all of that, you've got sort of the Christian mysticism coming in of all the different myths about the devil and witches and sell your soul and a contract. And they start blaming things on this random goat because the goat is symbolic of a demon. And he's literally a scapegoat throughout the movie. And I won't spoil the end, but it spirals out of control, of course. So there's a lot of things that turn people off in that slow burn, slow pace, art film, old speak. But a different one, and we're going to go insanely off the rails here. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
We're leaving orbit, okay? So I had the misfortune of growing up in not one but two haunted houses.
Oh, wow.
No, not at the moment. Everything's fine here now.
Oh,
But when I was a kid and a teenager, I got to experience some very wild horror movie level stuff. You almost caught me earlier when we were talking about Insidious. It's like, oh yeah, the demon. Like, yeah, I've seen things like that. But anyway.
What?
The point is that I, for a while, did live in a house that was objectively haunted, crazy bad stuff. But husband and wife, my mom and stepdad, fighting. Family, infighting. They're blaming animals. They're blaming the dogs. They're blaming anything. And it's all spiraling out of control, chaotically, violently. No matter what happens, the spooky stuff just won't stop. And The Witch perfectly encapsulates that feeling in a different time setting. It was also very rural, and we were hiding. So it hit me at a very personal level.
Yeah, I cannot say that I can relate to that on that personal level. I will just echo what you said about it being in a rural 1600 setting, which is not the most enticing when you want to really bring in a mainstream audience. You know, not a lot of people are going to want to do a lot of thinking or just working. I will admit, when I first watched The Witch, it was kind of difficult to catch on in terms of just the way they speak. It's kind of hard to hear what they're saying or understand what they're saying. So, yeah, I get why audiences didn't love it, but it's definitely a movie that's grown on me as well. I'm not a big Funko Pop collector, but I do have one Funko Pop, and it is Mr. Black Phillip. I will admit
that's
that.
Right. Black Phillip. I forgot the name.
Black Phillip. I will never forget Black Phillip the goat. He is iconic in the modern horror now. So,
especially for having such a very small little role in that movie. Oof.
I will never forget his line, "Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?" I think that's his famous line. I'll never forget it. So I love The Witch. That's great top 3, by the way. Segueing a little bit more into horror villains. I mean, we haven't talked about some of the most iconic ones ever, and people might be thinking, what's going on? They haven't talked about Michael or Freddy or Jason or Pennywise. Do you have a favorite or like 3 favorite horror villains that you love regardless of how popular they are?
I do. I wrote down Freddy Krueger. I feel like that's an easy one. That's like right because Freddy Krueger is scary, violent, but funny, charismatic. Robert Englund always playing it up. It's always fun to watch Freddy Krueger from the original all the way to like the remake. And it kind of makes that because at the time, all the slashers and all the killers were like dude in mask, walking quickly, very boring. And Freddy's gonna talk trash to you and insult you and pick you apart.
Yes,
and that made it more fun. So one of the other movie villains that I loved is only in a couple of movies. I love the Blob, mostly because I find that concept to be utterly horrifying. I'm thinking mostly about the '88 movie starring Kevin Dillon and I forget maybe Michael Biehn. I can't remember. But the Blob is essentially a giant mass of sentient acid, like the size of a house, weighs 100 tons. It can squeeze under any door, through any vent, through any sewer system. It doesn't need air. It doesn't need food. It doesn't need light, heat, anything. And it has no conscience, and it will melt you if it touches you. And that is a terrifying concept that I feel could use a remake because it's something you almost can't fight. It's almost Lovecraftian in nature. So The Blob was a really scary one
It's a
for
good
me.
one. It's a really good one.
And the last one is a little bit more Freddy Krueger-like, another one that I enjoyed from eons past that didn't quite get their time in the sun was The Wishmaster. I really enjoyed
Oh, wow,
Wishmaster.
Wishmaster. Good times.
First movie, pretty good. The rest of them, again, rapidly going down the bottom of the barrel. And I love the Wishmaster because he's a genie, an evil djinn. So whatever you wish for, he has to grant, but in a terrible way. So like he's in jail and somebody in jail says, I'd like to just walk right through those bars, right on out of here. And it like smushes him through, or some little smart comment like that. But he can also be defeated if you're very specific in your wishes. So with the Wishmaster, there's this great mind game going on, and to a lesser degree than Freddy, but still similar, he's like screwing with you on a psychological level. So I feel like that's a really fun, but ultimately underutilized horror villain.
Wow, good choices. Good choices. I love those choices. I want to go back to Freddy Krueger for just one second, because we talked about remakes and reboots happening all the time. Strangely enough, we haven't had a Nightmare on Elm Street remake since the early 2000s, late 2000s.
Yeah.
When
I think they remade Friday the 13th, and then not long after they remade that one with the guy that plays Rorschach from The Watchmen.
Yes. I cannot remember his name for the life of me right now. Jackie Earl Haley, I think his name is.
Yes.
Wow, it came to me
Basically,
just right now.
did all of the acting for The Watchmen.
Yes, exactly. He carried The Watchmen on his back. But he did the remake. That was like late 2000s. They did the Friday the 13th remake. But it's been over 10 years since we've had those movies. We've had Michael Myers come back. We've had Pennywise come back. Would you even want to see them come back?
I really don't know if it'll be the same without the same actor. At the end of the day, Freddy Krueger and Robert Englund, it's England, I can never say
I
it
say
right.
England, but I don't even really know.
They're almost inseparable from each other, even if by accident. The other people that Mr. Haley that played Freddy Krueger, it wasn't the same. It didn't have quite that same sort of smart assery to it. So I feel like that would be really hard to capture, though I do think there's a unique opportunity to remake the second Nightmare on Elm Street movie, which, as you may remember, is the one that had the first male Scream Queen, who was a gay actor in the closet, and they got a gay screenwriter, but the director didn't know it. And they made like this sort of secret movie about coming out of the closet and homophobia and stuff like that. A lot of really questionable scenes in there for like 86, you know?
Interesting.
And given the political climate and the way that progressive woke media tends to sell and transgressive stuff, like, oh, did you hear that Superman's kissing boys now and stuff like that? I feel like remaking the second Nightmare on Elm Street and playing up the gay angle even more might be even scarier, which is kind of what Blumhouse is doing with the upcoming They Them, which I think stars Kevin Bacon.
Yes, I've heard about they/them is the play on words for that one. I know very little except that it's called they/them and it's being made by Blumhouse. We'll have to see what they do. Blumhouse has had a really interesting career as of late. I mean, they made Academy Award winning Get Out. Distributed that. And then they also have done Fantasy Island or Truth or Dare, I think is also them. So they've had an interesting track record as of late. So we'll see what they do with that movie. Okay, interesting. I've always wondered, I always thought that we would get a Nightmare on Elm Street remake, but we haven't yet. But who knows? The years are young. I'm sure we'll get it eventually. Let's transfer and pivot real quick to our last segment before our time runs out today. We got some questions on Twitter, and we have to talk about this one question from Crytek Diablo, who said, what is your favorite non-horror movie? Because now I'm dying to know. We've talked about all of these horror movies under the sun. What are some things that are non-horror that you love?
I really enjoy Kill Bill, volumes 1 and 2 for different reasons. That's a bit of a genre bender. It's still violent and stuff, but it pays a beautiful homage to a huge chunk of martial arts films that I grew up watching as a kid. And I thought it was done in a masterful and classy way. And it had an anime segment. I love anime. I mean, I'm wearing Ghost in the Shell. So it had an animated segment. And there were elements of it that were silly and stupid, but that was done with deliberate purpose to cause you to feel a certain way. And I think I really enjoyed that. I enjoy a lot of Tarantino's works. I enjoy a lot of Villeneuve. I enjoy Dune. Blade Runner 2049.
Love it.
I have to suck it up and say might be better than the original.
Whoa. You know what? A lot of people won't disagree with you. I've made several videos on Blade Runner and 2049. I am still a Blade Runner 1 loyalist, but there are a lot of people in my comment section always saying 2049 is better. So you're not alone in that. You're not alone in that.
It's so good. I couldn't easily pick one or the other. So that's fantastic. And what other kind of movies?
Are you, I mean, we talked about so much horror. Are you secretly like a romance rom-com person as well? Or are you
Not much,
no?
but every now and then I'll watch
Okay.
one, like a
Okay.
really good one. The problem with romance and rom-com is like what we talked about, horror movies are spooky ghosts. Romance and rom-com is a lot of like Tyler Perry, which man are you going to be with? Or
Yeah.
like The Notebook or something where the women are irrational or abusive. And I don't really care for that. But there are fantastic romantic films. I think there was my brain is it wasn't The Time Traveler's Wife. It was this UK film about a young lad who could stop time.
About Time.
Yes, About Time.
Yeah.
That's mostly a romance movie. Loved it.
Yeah, I would consider
Beautiful
it.
film. So
Yeah,
things like
yeah.
that. But I don't play around in that genre as much because I have a tendency to get bored.
Yeah, I mean, any genre, romance, action, horror, you have those big mainstream kind of cookie cutter stories where they're not really engaging. The characters are really cliche. But then you have the smaller ones, the indie ones, the artsy ones that can definitely offer some things. So, but I do love About Time. That is a very popular one as well. Okay, last question we got from Cookie Night.
Okay.
He asked both of us actually, what kind of horror do you two prefer?
Ooh.
We're talking villains as a cult, as a person. Do you prefer possession movies, or do you like a good classic monster movie? So, what type do you kind of lean towards?
I think I lean towards horror films that are a little bit more survival oriented, which more often than not is going to be monsters instead of other stuff. But there's sort of, and maybe even the most appealing thing about horror is that there's a man versus nature element to it, because we live in our element that we create, threat free, problem free all the time. And the core of a lot of horror movies is normal people suddenly tossed into a fight for their lives against question mark. And that element of it, I really like. That's probably my favorite type of horror movie.
Okay. Do you like? I don't know if you ever got into creature features or into like the late '90s, like Anaconda and Lake Placid and Piranha. Most recently, I can think of is like Crawl came out about 3 years ago with the
That was a
alligators.
gnarly one.
Yeah. I find myself, yeah, they're a little cheesy, but I'm a sucker for those like Arachnophobia from the early '90s.
I was just
Big
talking
fan of
about
that.
that today. John Goodman and Jeff Daniels, I think.
Yeah.
That's classified as a comedy now, by the way.
I recently learned this after my rewatch that it's a horror comedy, which is a whole different can of worms that we didn't even get into
No,
yet.
those are fun too.
Those are fun too. I do love them as well, but I love Arachnophobia. That one's a good time. So I think if I were to answer this, I kind of lean towards what you're saying as well, that being put in a situation of survival is always really great. I do like a good possession ghost story sometimes if it's, trying to do something different with it. If it's, very cliche, I need to exercise this ghost, some scares. I'm not really in love with it, but trying to do something a little bit different with it, I'm a fan. I'm a fan. So those would be my options. Okay, well, we're at the very end here. Is there any last minute horror movie you want to just throw out there that you love, that you feel like more people should watch, that you want to just get out there before we close off the episode?
Yep, I'm going to throw out a few. Number one is The Gate from the 80s, which as an adult may not be much, but as a kid hit me like a dump truck. It is for children. It is specifically a horror movie that is specifically designed to terrify children, and it does a masterful job of that. I did like Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. It was kind of a schlocky film, but I feel like there was a lot more going on with that than most people gave it credit for. And it had Jada Pinkett before she was Smith. Rollerball, not traditionally considered a horror film, but it does have a deep streak of nihilism and sort of corporate evil from the 70s. I like In the Mouth of Madness, starring Sam Neill. And then the one that I'm going to recommend, pulling it back to our conversation on Shudder, is Blood Machines. It's about an hour and 10 minutes. And I don't know why, but they broke it into 3 parts to call it episodes. It's really one short film. Brilliant. I feel like everybody should watch that. It was so good.
Blood Machines. Perfect. These are great recommendations from me as well. And it's perfect. 110 minutes, you said? It's easy. I can do that.
No, I said about an hour and 10 minutes. So
hour and 10 minutes. It's
Yeah.
even better. It's even better. Even better. I could take that, do that in a day.
it was
Perfect.
a Kickstarter project, and they just stretched it The thing I will warn you about Blood Machines is that while it's very good, it's got this retro kind of vibe. The first 35, maybe even 40 minutes, kind of boring. But then the last 20, it's like VHS 94. It just takes off and just goes crazy.
That is the one nice thing about a lot of like the Shudder original stuff. A lot of it's short too. We got talking like hour to hour 30 max. You don't really get many stuff on there that's over 90 minutes, which
That's
is
fine.
really convenient when you're an adult who has a lot of things to do, right? I mean,
Can't
content
watch the
creation.
7-hour Justice League.
No. I love that we just threw that in there right now. It's going to be perfect. I have been an active voice, and I will never watch 4 hours of that ever again. So it's really funny to me you brought it up. Well, Drifter, thank you so much for being on the episode. We'll make sure to link all your information in the details of the episode. And as always, guys, make sure to follow us on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube and Apple, drop a review. Drifter, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And we'll see all of you guys on the next episode.